Hi, my name is Judge. Huge changes coming in with this recent patch 25. Changed cards. We're going to take a look at every single one of them. I'm going to give you my opinion on the changes in regards to both Standard and Arena, starting with Wild Pod Knoll, which now, instead of costing one less for each card you've added from another class, it is now for each non-rogue class. So this notably is a huge Maestra nerf, of course, as you can no longer just draw your rogue cards that are in your own deck and get your super cheap Knoll nice and early. Potion Belt doesn't work with it when you're a Maestra anymore to get your turn 2 0 mana 3/5s. Kind of killing this card, right? You could maybe get some zero cost Knolls from playing Thief Rogue down the line, but it just doesn't have the same impact when it's later in the game rather than on 2 or 3. So really hard hit for Knoll and Maestra package. In Arena, pretty much no change. Card is still pretty good in Thief metas where you have these access to Swashbucklers and other Thief cards, and if you don't, it's bad. Next, we have Sinstone Graveyard, which loses stealth on the ghosts. Now, I think that this card is kind of nerfed just because Knoll is now going to be a lot worse. So I think that's actually kind of the bigger nerf than it losing stealth. But it is a boost to interactivity. Actually being able to target them with hard removal is a big deal. But I think the ghosts are generally just going to be smaller now that Knoll is kind of taking away that archetype. In Arena, this card is not good, and it remains not good. Next, final showdown. The Demon Hunter Quest with the all-spell deck has been all over the place. Getting some... I've been OTK'd from 30 on turn 5 against this deck, and I'm sure many of you have as well. So absolutely insane potential for this deck to do a lot of burst damage. The first part of the quest line goes to 6-card draw instead of 4. And that's a huge nerf. I'm going to guess that just completely kills the card. This is not a draftable card in Arena, so nothing to say there. Next, Sinful Brand goes from 1 mana to 2 mana, and I think there's a good change. The amount of face damage you can deal for 1 mana with this card, and often with the old quest for 0 mana, was kind of through the roof when you combine it with the new 4 damage spell Demon Hunter card. This makes sense. You can still do a ton of damage with this, just not for so cheap. In Arena, this card was pretty bad already at 1 mana. It was maybe a bit underrated, but it was still pretty bad, and now it's extremely bad, so don't draft this in Arena. Next up, Shockspitter gets hit with another nerf, going from 3 mana to 4 mana. It is a 3/3 instead of a 2/2, not really that relevant. It's really mostly about the mana shift to 4, and good. I mean, again, it's so much face damage, so much uninteractive gameplay with all this damage coming, OTKs coming right from hand, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Brand Shockspitter, Devouring Shockspitter is not going to be something you can afford anymore. So that's going to hurt this deck a lot more than the 2 to 3 mana nerf, I believe. Will it still see play? I honestly think it could. I think it could see play in like face decks with a lot of weapons as like just a Brand single finisher, but it's hurt. It's hurt a lot with this change, more so than the 2 to 3, I think. So we'll see if it survives in any sort of face weapon decks. In Arena, this card was pretty good, honestly, at 3 mana. I think it's going to be pretty good at 4 mana. I think it kind of remains about the same power level in Arena. You get some weapons, and it's just a fine body that deals some damage. That's just good Arena stuff. So next we have the very first Death Knight nerf that we have seen in Hearthstone history, and it goes to Glacial Advance. Deal 4 damage. Your next spell now costs 1 less instead of 2. This is a really good change. I think this is a really smart change. Copying 3 Glacial Advances with your legendary and then dealing, 24 from hand just for so cheap with 1 cost, kind of boring. And even more so now that they're nerfing Rogue and Hunter so hard, you're going to see Frost Death Knights. And so getting on top, and there already were a decent amount of Frost Death Knights. It was going to be the next one that is just going to take over, right? And now you get ahead of it, get this Glacial Advance nerfed. I think that's a really good nerf early on. So I really like getting ahead of the game here with this Glacial Advance nerf. In Arena, yeah, of course, you lose a mana on your discount, but often you're just using this without the discount in Arena anyway. It's still better than Shadow Bolt? Still better than Shadow Bolt. It's still a good piece of removal. Just a light nerf in Arena. And the last nerf is the big one, the big daddy. ASTALOR gets nerfed. Let's take a look at what it is. All 3 phases were nerfed. The first change was to Astalor Bloodsworn, the first phase, which is now Mana Thirst 5 instead of 4, so you have to wait one more turn to get that 2 damage. The second phase was from Mana Thirst 7 to Mana Thirst 8, and again, just one more turn for the 5 armor, and the last one is now the same Mana Thirst, but only 7 damage instead of 8, so it's 7/14 instead of 8/16. These are some very minor changes. You know, the decks that run this, like Druid that runs this, they're still going to run it, they're still going to OTK you. What this really does is just kind of takes out Astalor from being an auto-include in every single deck. You know, you're not dealing quite as much damage at the top end. You're probably just gonna not include it, maybe not include it, and just go for the kill earlier. So I think it's still going to be insanely good, and it's going to be run a lot, but it's just not in every single deck now, which is probably what they were going for. In Arena, it's still busted. It went from being extremely busted to it's still extremely busted. Okay, moving on to the buffs. There are a lot of them, and we're going to start with Death Knight's Battlefield Necromancer. Goes from 2 mana, 2/3 at the end of your turn, raise a corpse as a 1/2 taunt to a 1/3 taunt. And this, as an Arena guy, this terrifies me. I'll start with Constructed. Okay, sure, we need to make buffs to Blood and Unholy. I get that. My Arena background, though, is just like, can we not buff the cards that aren't already singularly overpowered? Like, I get that it doesn't, you know, you gotta have things work together in Standard, but this is a 2 mana 3/5 with an upside before the change, you know? So it just I get it. We need to be gutsy with these Unholy and Blood buffs for Standard's sake. Arena, this card goes from being absolutely insanely overpowered to, excuse me, why did this OP card get buffed? So probably good for Constructed, but oh my god, it's so strong. It's so good. Same thing with Bone Guard Commander for Arena. Already broken in Arena. Like, it's already so strong in Arena, and the 1/3s just make it even stronger. For Standard, buffing these 6, 7+ mana cards is going to be a lot more impactful, I think. Like, the 2 mana card was already crazy. If you want an 8 mana card to be played, it's got to be doing a lot. It's crazy, but, like, you know, that's not going to do a whole lot compared to what it was before. Good stuff. It's tough to balance between Standard and Arena, I'm telling you. Speaking of which, we have Unholy Frenzy, which kind of fits the same boat as the other 2 cards, where in Standard, okay, you know, it's a card that has a very powerful effect that is now more accessible in your Unholy decks and is going to make you able to develop more quickly. I might actually try to make you know, with these 2 Unholy buffs, a you know, quick deck, maybe even with the buffed Malignant Horror, who knows, with this Unholy Frenzy. Great combo there. Next buff is Wither. I like this change. Seeing like no play at all right now, and 1 mana is very accessible, very easy, half price. Is this enough to get your, you know, aggressive? I think this could be actually like enough to maybe warp your aggro druids to start with that undead package, right, of your Lingering Zombie into your Nerubian. And just having this as such an easy, accessible buff to your board for damage could be worth looking for. For Arena, the card was actually okay. It's just a little bit inconsistent. And now, with only a 1 mana hit, you can actually just hit 1 minion, right? And it's fine. So I think that it becomes a lot more draftable in Arena. I like this change. Next up, we have Bone Collar. It goes from a 2/4 to a 2/5. Okay. I don't know. I don't really see that making a difference so much. I don't really have many thoughts on this. I don't really think it's going to make much of a difference. It becomes slightly better in Arena. Haunting Nightmare goes from a 3/3 that summons a 3/3 to a 4/3 that summons a 4/3. You've seen this with Yimmeryar. And that card was already insane before it was buffed too, and remained insane. This card, I wouldn't have said it was insane due to the delayed stats. It goes from being understatted to like finely statted. You can get some sort of aggressive undead priest coming in here. I mean, obviously with the previous buff we just saw, this becomes better too. So it's a strong change. In Arena, this card was already good, and now I think it becomes like top tier. Goes from good to great in Arena. Next up, High Cultist Basileff. I had never heard of this card in my life before the patch notes, so probably needed a buff. I swear, I'd never even heard of this card. So you can see they're pushing like a cheap undead package for Priest. I mean, Mind Eater is already a great card in there. I mean, it's a 4 mana 3/5, so it probably should have a very strong effect. and that's going to summon a lot of stuff. I think that's a good change, because, again, I hadn't even heard of the card. In Arena, I think this is a very relevant change, because 4 mana 3/5, as much as it's a bad stat line, it still is sometimes playable. Like Sentient Shieldmaster, as much as it, it's 2023 and there's like 4 mana 10/10s out there, it's sometimes still playable. This goes from an unplayable stat line to an okay, sometimes playable stat line. You hit 1, 2/2, or 3/2 with this, and it's decent stats now. So that's relevant. Probably not the legendary you're going to be most excited to see in your draft, but I think it's a fair change, good change. Next up, Darkon Drathir goes from 8 mana to 7 mana. I just feel like with how quick Standard's been, I can't really see, a turn 7 versus turn 8 with this card being that big of a deal, but maybe the meta slows down enough that this stabilizes against aggro. I thought this was always a very strong card. I've put this in, playing in my duels runs, and put this in my disco lock all the time, getting one cost copies and whatnot, and it's like just a really, really solid individual unit. In Arena, I think this remains about the same. It's an understated card with a big effect, and it already was that. It's not like you're looking to play this on curve in Arena, whereas in Standard you might, to stop like aggro decks coming in from face damage from hand. 7 mana 6/6, okay. Infantry Reanimator. I have seen this only a few times as a 6 mana 4/4. And again, as an individual unit, that's a decent amount of stats, 6 mana 4/4, and resurrecting a thing, but in Standard, that's obviously way too slow. And I'm not really seeing the undead you're going to be looking for this, even as a 4 mana 5/5, but maybe there's one specific one where this discount makes a difference. I don't really see that. It's probably a fine buff if it's a big question mark as whether I don't really see it seeing play. In Arena, this card goes from quite good to very good. Again, you don't need to hit something super huge for this to be good, and you get a 1 minute discount. Of course, that's going to make it stronger. Vengeful Walloper is a Demon Hunter card that was 7 mana and is now 6. Its Rush costs 1 less for each Outcast card you've played this game. I haven't really seen any of that, and I don't think that this change is going to all of a sudden make Outcast Demon Hunter a thing, but they kind of maybe are looking for new decks now that their questline has been hit so much. So is that 1 mana discount going to all of a sudden make people be getting 0 mana copies of this? I don't think so. For Arena, right now there's like no Outcast cards in, so it's kind of just awful anyway. But it's relevant, because now instead of, you just need 1 less Outcast card. That's more important in Arena. Energy Shaper goes from 4 mana 3/5 to 3 mana 3/4. Which I just love this change. I love this buff. This is a fun card. This and the next buff, super fun. It becomes a lot more accessible. You can even tempo this on curve, and it's like actually okay stats compared to what it used to be as a 3/5. In Arena, this is actually now good stats for the cost, and it wasn't before, even if you don't use the effect. So just a fantastic change. What's to say about this? It's just cheaper, more accessible, fun card. Love it. Same with Vast Wisdom. Goes from 3 mana to 2 mana. In Arena, it was pretty decent at 3 mana. In Standard, it's way too slow. Make it 1 mana cheaper, and all of a sudden you get a really fun card that is a lot more accessible, gives you lots more options. With a meta that's going to slow down ever so slightly, I think this is gonna be a very fun one to experiment with. So super cool, awesome buff. 2 awesome buffs for Mage. Time Warden gets a similar treatment, where it goes from a not very good stat line to a playable stat line. 3 mana 3/4, exact same buff from a 4 mana 3/5. And very importantly with this in Standard is you can now play this on 3 and then come into your 5/5 rush Divine Shield taunt on turn 4. And that's a powerful unit, right? That's a powerful unit. You couldn't do that on curve before, and now you can. So that's a pretty big deal. Even making it cheaper for more dragons if you're in the late game. If you're playing like a control Flight of the Bronze deck with dragons, this becomes a lot juicier. Maybe even a heavier tempo deck, now that you can come right into the 4 with this. In Arena, it goes same as before with the Mage card. It goes from a stat line that's not good to a stat line that's good on its own. A 3 mana 3/4 dragon with no text is a great Arena pick. So this card is just insane in Arena. Epic, pretty rare, but it's very strong. Next we have Ashvadon, the Grand Shield, goes from a 3 mana 3/3 to a 3 mana 3/4 with Taunt, which becomes very interesting when we see another warrior buff. Keeping it on theme. Not a very good stat line for tempo, now a good stat line for tempo, but I don't... So in Arena, that's important. It's now a 3/4, meaning it is very playable in Arena, regardless of the effect. Cool. You even just get a coin, and this is a good play. Again, not the most exciting legendary to draft, but that's pretty good. In Standard, I don't really think they care about the extra health as much as they do about it having taunt, which it becomes very interesting if these control warriors are going to decide to run this with the next buff of Last Stand, which gets a huge buff from 4 mana all the way down to 1. It's draw taunt minion, double its stats. The caveat here, though, being it has to be mana for 7 now. So turn 7 or later, you pay 1 mana to draw taunt and double its stats. But there's a lot of taunt buff synergy, and 4 mana to draw a card. No, you can't do that. You just can't do that in Standard. 1 mana to draw a card. That is very doable, and there are some taunts that like to have their stats doubled. So I'm very interested. I'm looking at Lorthamar into Last Stand into something. Maybe that's too slow, but it sounds super fun. Big fan of this buff. Nelly's pirate ship. I don't know about this. I mean, it's a buff to the discounts to the pirates for Nelly. Instead of costing 1 less, they cost 2 less. Okay. Obviously nowhere close to its former glory where everything costs 1, with Mr. Smite coming in. The card's already good in Arena. It's a good value tool, and now it's definitely a stronger buff for Arena than for Constructed. Remornia gets buffed to a 5/10, and this is our last buff of the video here, and a lot of people are very excited about this one. And I am too. The card is just so cool. It's just so excellently designed, and it deserves to see play. Putting it to 5 is big in Standard because you've got that breaking point for their hero's health if you're pushing a lot of face damage with it. In Arena, this card was already broken, and it becomes more broken. Athletic studies into this is going to make you cry when you get hit by it. All right, there we have it. Those are my thoughts on the changes for Constructed and Arena. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything in the comments below. Appreciate you guys watching. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit that thumbs up button. It helps with the algo a lot, so I appreciate that. And I will see you guys in the next video. Happy Hearthstoning.
My name is Judge.
Whose name is Judge?
My name is.
Whose name is Judge?
My name is.
That's a silly name.
Judge.
Okay, that's enough.